So let's say that, again, it could be any other country. Chinese, Russians, Norwegians had infiltrated our government and we were worried. We're not sure, but we're worried. Hey, are they at the agriculture department? Are they in the Secret Service? Are they in the FBI? How in the world would we find out? And how in the world would we take them out of our government?
I think pattern recognition, honestly. I mean, maybe I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. What worked for me, pattern recognition. If we just see consistently that our government is acting on behest of whoever, and it benefits them, that country more than it benefits our own country, especially in something where the stakes are as high as war and peace. Then I think we just have to be honest with ourselves. And look, for me, a guy who fought in the GWOT extensively, if you would have told me 20 years ago that, hey, you're in Iraq right now heavily because of the Israeli lobby, I would have said, no, I don't think so. I think we thought there was weapons of mass destruction here or something. But again, when you look at it on a broader timeline, you look at who has benefited from it, you come to an inevitable conclusion. I think there's a preponderance of data that supports what we're talking about here, that Israel has undue influence on our foreign policy, on who we go to war with in the Middle East. And again, rooting it out, I think it's transparency is the best sunlight. And then I think we need more people from the inside to come out and speak out. And I don't expect everyone to do what I did, but there are other ways to come out and speak out. And just to say that we're not going to go along with this, and to be skeptical of the amount of influence that Israel has, or the agendas that they're trying to push. But again, having, I think, new media really highlight a lot of this, and then have people be engaged as we go into the election season, to say, I'm not going to support candidates who are taking money from Israel. And as a matter of fact, a litmus test. And again, this is where I'm hopeful that there's going to be some kind of unity on the left and right, especially when you talk about the executive branch. Because at the end of the day, I think a lot of times presidents get frustrated with how little power they have to affect things domestically, and they focus on foreign policy. So honestly, I'm moving personally towards a place where I could kind of care less about a lot of the president's other policies, but I really want to hear about their foreign policy and how they're influenced by foreign countries, and whether or not they're going to be susceptible to marching us off to another regime change war. I think that's going to be critical. We've got to get people engaged. And I think because of what's taken place here in the last year, but then there's just the preponderance of new media and attention that's being called to the Israeli influence, I think we're moving to a place where they're not going to be able to simply outshout us by calling us anti-Semites, or just run nonstop Fox News, MSNBC coverage to snuff us out. I think this issue is going to have to be dealt with by both political parties, and I don't think the status quo is going to hold.
Yeah, so look, last thing here in terms of how to do it, right? So look, in the media, it's clear who supports Israel above all. It's not even close. We know exactly who they are, and there's nothing to do there. It's a free country. They could say anything they like. They could keep telling us forever and ever how we have to kneel to Israel, otherwise we're all hate Jews, or whatever insane thing that they've come up with, and they could just try to browbeat us and fire us and all that stuff. But at least they're outside the government, and we see them, and they're allowed to say whatever they want. They're Americans, right? We think. But still, they're allowed whether they're Americans or not. Inside the government is a different question, right? We cannot allow people inside our government to represent any other foreign country. That is deeply problematic, and anyone can tell that, unless, of course, they're a mainstream media reporter, in which case they can't tell anything. But if we elect someone else that also has their top lifetime donor being AIPAC, which has been the case for many, many presidents, Biden, Trump, and I didn't do the math on Clinton and the rest, but they have all taken tremendous money from the Israeli lobby, right? Okay, so those guys you can't trust, period, that's obvious. And by the way, guys, again, it doesn't really have anything to do, definitely has absolutely nothing to do with religion, but also really irrespective of the government, right? If the Bulgarians had an incredible PAC that gave hundreds of millions of dollars to our politicians, and then somebody took tons of money from the Bulgarian PAC, I'd be concerned that they were gonna serve Bulgaria. It's the most obvious logical thing in the world. Okay, so then, Joe, we assume that there's going to, let's say we finally elect an honest, clean president that's actually an American and wants to represent Americans. What would he do? So like, as I imagine it, but I'm a layman and I'm on the outside, right? So the Secret Service, you mentioned we're a little worried about their lapses. Do we know that there's anyone who's doing anything wrong in the Secret Service? I don't know, you said you don't know, right? But couldn't you find out? Like, couldn't you ask, hey, what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania? And maybe they're gonna have an answer for you, Joe, that says, oh no, it was Bob and Susie and they went for a coffee break and it turns out they were having a relationship and that's why they blew it and we fired them, right? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I see, oh, Bobby and Susie were fired. Oh, they were the ones who screwed that up. Okay, good, logical explanation, right? Or, yeah, we just didn't check that building and that building happened to be the one without the cameras and had a clear line of sight, but whatever, dude, we didn't check it. Then I go, okay, I'm worried about that guy, right? So is that kind of how it would go?
Yeah, and look, I think we're going to have to be whoever it is that wants to be an honest broker and actually clean up our government and get control of the government for we the people. They're going to have to be very aggressive because the bureaucracies are deeply entrenched, and a lot of the people who are influenced by this or have just become accustomed to a certain way of doing business, and they've been promoted based on not asking questions. They've been promoted with going along with the status quo. Those people need to aggressively be rooted out. And again, that's another core thing that President Trump ran on, was draining the swamp, taking out the deep state, and really going to battle with them. And that's much deeper than going after who the perpetrators of Russiagate were. That's having a healthy skepticism of everything that comes out of all of our institutions, looking in the dark, uncomfortable places and trying to figure out exactly why key events like we've talked about here tonight actually happen, and not being satisfied with the simple answers that just don't pass basic common sense. I think that's absolutely key. Otherwise, just the sheer volume of day-to-day grind in the government will just kind of beat you down, and that's kind of how the machine operates. And so you're going to have somebody who is willing to spend a significant amount of time and hire the right people and go in and aggressively pursue the truth. I mean, we can probably sit here for the rest of the night and list off all the things we think the government has been dishonest with, all the different ways that the government has abused its powers. And we need to start getting at least the truth out about a lot of those key events. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of declassification. There's a lot that just needs to be done in terms of oversight. So that needs to be the focus of the next actual administration that's dead serious about getting to the heart of what the deep state or the apparatus, whatever you want to call it, is.
Yeah. So very last thing is that, look, some of the stuff is easy. You can see with your own eyes. Some of it's very hard. How do you find the assets that they're hiding? But the last one is about foreign policy, and that's another one that people say is super hard, but actually seems pretty easy to me. So let me run this by you. So they say, well, Marco Rubio said, and so did Mike Johnson, by the way, and Caroline Levitt and so many others. Oh, the Israelis were going to attack, so we didn't have a choice. We had to protect our troops by attacking with them. So the Israelis forced us into this war, is the obvious implication. Isn't it easy to say, no, you will not attack, and if you do, you will lose all of your funding? Why is that not the simplest thing in the world?
I 100% agree with you. And I think that's what we should have said. I think after June, that's 100% what we should have said. We should have said, if you guys want us to continue to provide your defense, you will not go on the offensive unless we tell you to, because we are paying for it. That's this relationship. In any country that we're paying that much money to, I don't think we should be paying. I just think financially, I don't think our country is in a position where we should be paying any country that much money. But if we're going to, we need to be the benefactors. We're calling the shots. They then at that point in time, when they're taking that much money from us and relying on us for their defense, they are our protectorate. They are our proxy. That's the way this works. If they don't like that relationship, then don't take the money. And so I think we very simply should have said to them, frankly, like you just will not do these following actions, or you will lose support from us. But the Israelis know that basically there's not much that we're going to do to cut off the amount of money and resources that we give them. And they also know that, like, if they get attacked, then we have to defend them. They also know that if they go on the offense, that they can basically force our hand. And that's what's taken place here over the course of the last month. So Again, I agree with you 100%. That has to be the way that we reassert ourselves in this relationship. And kind of circling back to what we began with, if President Trump is going to get us out of the situation that we're in right now, step one, before any kind of negotiations, he has to restrain the Israelis. He has to say to them, you will not take any more offensive actions. I am working towards a negotiation. If you do, without our permission, it will change our relationship and you will lose support from us. I personally think, and I know we probably disagree here, I think President Trump has the type of personality where he could flip the table in a very Trumpian manner on the Israelis and reassert our dominance and take us on a whole new course that actually puts us in a much better place. That's what I'm praying for right now, and that's what has to happen if we're going to regain essentially our sovereignty and pull us back from the brink of this disaster we're tumbling towards in the Middle East.
Yeah, so I think that 99% of the country understands, we give them, we've literally given them over $330 billion in inflation adjusted money, let alone the $8 trillion spent on the wars for them. Yeah, you could use that as leverage. It's not a complicated question. The only 1% that doesn't seem to understand is our politicians and our media. Gee, I wonder why. And then in terms of Trump, no, I think he could do it. I don't want you to mistake what I'm saying. I don't think he's smart at all. I think he doesn't understand how Israel played him in 800 different ways, and he's bungling and inept. That's my opinion. But he is a wild character. He's not a normal corporate robot, right? The corporate robots will do exactly as they're programmed. Whereas Trump is a wild man, and I think that's why Israel is actually slightly concerned about him. So it would be great if he found his bearings and remembered that he was supposed to be anti-war and America first. And by the way, as much as I can't stand him on other things, if he got rid of Israel's influence in America, he would deserve a tremendous amount of credit for that. And honestly, I think people, whoever it is, Trump, the next Democratic president, the next Republican president, whoever it is, would have statues of them built all across America. So that's my opinion. Joe Kent, former director of National Counterterrorism Center, and I'll say it, American hero, who actually opposed the war, and unlike others in the administration, meant it and said it and tried to prevent it, and is trying to prevent it as we speak. We appreciate your patriotism, and thank you for joining us, Joe.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, brother. We need more patriots like Joe Kent. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.